Star Trek Voyager, Starfleet Academy, Lifeline. Chapter 7. With a flash of light, the planet exploded. "Blast it!" Kathryn cried, watching gargantuan chunks of planetary debris whip past her view screen, tumbling end over end in their weightless flight. "I monitored the readouts. The levels were within tolerable limits. What happened this time?" Pole stood nearby, her arm twitching, a frown on her face. Her eyes flicked across the readouts. "Well, the planetary substation command signal acknowledgement slipped out of phase with the main data stream, for one. Then the geothermal levels kept bouncing on and out of safety tolerances, even though they averaged out as safe. The fail-safe shutdown routines weren't implemented because the coordinating processor wasn't getting real-time data flow anymore, and Pole's voice faltered at the grim look on Kathryn's face. "It's a lot to keep track of," she said, almost apologetically. "Not for me," said Kathryn. "Computer, freeze simulation." The planetary debris on screen froze in place, and all instrumentation froze as well. "Mallet said this was a puzzle. There must be some trick I haven't thought of yet, that's all." Kathryn stood at the central console in the emitter control room of the starship Argonaut. But in reality, the control room was the transformed interior of a holosuite at the campus holocenter. She and Paul had been there for 2 hours already, and so far they'd done nothing but fail. This was the Academy's infamous Gravitation Regulation Station Epsilon program, otherwise known as the GRSE or Greasy Test. Its scenario was simple, as described by the computer itself. You are science technicians aboard the starship USS Argonaut, orbiting planet Epsilon 1, a Class M world with an advanced humanoid population of 3.6 billion. Gaussian field instabilities in the planet's core will soon cause massive tectonic and volcanic activity, threatening the population with annihilation. Your ship science officer has worked out a plan to utilize the onboard warp generators to seal the planetary core in a containment bubble, and to use a combination of surface substations and the ship's controls to stabilize Epsilon 1's core field. Your responsibility as leader of the stabilization team is to supervise the establishment of the containment bubble and coordinate interaction of the shipboard and dirt side field manipulations. Your efforts will determine whether the stabilization is accomplished safely. Good luck. It had all sounded quite straightforward to Kathryn until she got her first look at the process flow diagrams. With a dozen planetary substations exchanging data with the shipboard computer at near light speed, the stabilization process would push the envelope of a Miranda-class vessel's capabilities. There were hundreds of field manipulation points that had to flux in near-perfect sync, and at least 1,000 variables that could fluctuate and reduce the whole process to chaos. A chaos that could doom billions of people in mere minutes. Now, 4 attempts and 15.04 billion deaths later, the only thing that proved straightforward was how quickly Kathryn could fail each time. Curtly, she snapped commands to the holocomputer. "Computer, run Greasy scenario again, but skip the intro. Start at the beginning of the stabilization process." The computer chirped obligingly, and the control room shimmered. When it reappeared, it was the same as before, except the instrument readouts were different, and the view screen showed a blue, cloud-flecked planet below. Pole had sat uselessly by Kathryn's side all this time, waiting for her team leader to give her tasks to fulfill. But Kathryn's ruthless focus on the simulation had seemingly rendered the diasamon invisible. Beyond that, Pole had never been separated from Thrum for so long before, and the strain was beginning to show. Not only was her arm twitching, but her normally cheery disposition had slipped into depression. "What do you want me to do?" she ventured hesitantly. "As soon as I understand what needs to be done, I'll let you know," Kathryn muttered, eyes jumping from readout to readout. Pole might have said something in response, but Kathryn wasn't listening anymore. Her fingers flew like lightning across the control surfaces. setting up a new solution to cope with the ever-changing core conditions. With a process that could shift faster than a human could follow, Kathryn was convinced that her best solution was to try to anticipate what might go wrong and have adjustment routines preloaded and ready for execution. She tightened the feedback loop between the ship and the ground stations and signaled the bridge. "Emitter control standing by." "Acknowledged, emitter control," came the voice of the science officer over the comm. "Initialize stabilization process." "Initializing stabilization process. Janeway, Mark 5. All around Kathryn, the readouts began to change more rapidly. She looked quickly from one to the other and tapped various controls, shifting massive energy flows as fast as she could. "Emitter control substations 3, 7, and 12 are failing and dropping offline. Geothermal levels are redlining," came the voice over the comm. "Decrease flow stream. Compensate immediately." Sweat beaded Kathryn's brow, dripping into her eyes as she flicked them from readout to readout. "Aye, aye," she acknowledged, trying desperately to stem the rising tide of red lights. There were just too many controls to handle at once. "Stations 1, 2, and 9 report field compression backlash," warned the science officer, more urgent this time. "They're gone, emitter control. Destroyed. Abort stabilization process at once." "Wait a minute," Kathryn stammered. "I'm almost—" "Overload imminent," shouted the comm speaker. "She's going to—" The view screen image of Epsilon 1 exploded. Seconds later, a blinding flash of light enveloped Kathryn. When she could see again, the simulated emitter control room was gone, and the black and yellow gridded walls of the holosuite surrounded her and Paul. "Epsilon 1 has been destroyed," reported the computer's bland voice. "USS Argonaut has been destroyed." "Oh, great," moaned Kathryn. "This time, I not only blew up the planet, I blew up my own ship as well." Calling it quits for the night, Kathryn and Paul left the Holo Center and headed back to the dorms. Kathryn grumbled as she walked, telling Paul everything that had just happened as if the diaceman hadn't been there with her the whole time. She was just thinking out loud, trying to figure out a new angle on the problem, when she noticed Paul's pace getting faster and faster. "Paul, calm down. I know you've been separated from Thrum for over 2 hours, but—" Paul broke into a run. Kathryn raced after her, all the way up the dorm steps, through the main lounge and up to their room. Paul burst through the door and threw herself into her sister's arms. "Thrum! Thrum held her sister tight. "Paul, you're back! What took you so long? I thought I was going to twitch myself into a fit." "It's my fault," Kathryn said, flopping down on her bed. "I took too long on the greasy test, and I failed." Paul pulled reluctantly away from her twin. "It wasn't your fault, Kathryn. I should have helped." "You had enough on your mind already," Kathryn said. "I will handle it better tomorrow," Paul promised. "Thrum and I—" "Both will," finished Thrum. "Functioning on our own becomes easier as time goes by. The trick is to keep moving forward and not look back." "In other words, just keep running," Kathryn thought, getting tired just thinking about it. "Don't worry about when you're running. Don't worry about where you're running to. Just run." She pulled herself up to a sitting position. "Well, girls, I have some studying to do before I hit the sack." Paul giggled. "Hit the sack. I love that expression." "It makes no sense," Thrum stated critically. "We cadets do not sleep in sacks, and even if we did, why hit them first?" Paul punched Thrum's arm. "Who cares? It's funny." A knock on the door interrupted them. Kathryn said, "Come in," and the door whooshed aside to reveal Dunkirk Frost. Kathryn jumped to her feet. "Like I said, I've got to go," she told the twins, and before Dunkirk could utter a word, she grabbed up her data packs and headed out the door, squeezing past Dunkirk with a too cheery, "Hi, Frost. See you later." Kathryn hurried down the hallway, trying not to think about why she needed to escape from Dunkirk Frost. Being around him bothered her lately. Although she certainly didn't dislike him, she liked him a lot. But every time he came around, she felt anxious. She preferred not to ponder what that might mean. Pushing the anxiety aside, Kathryn focused her mind on the problem at hand. She wasn't really going to study per se. She wanted to go over her memories of the Greasy test and analyze the scenario. Already she'd failed it 5 times, all in the first evening. Mallet would no doubt receive a record of her attempts from the Hollow Center in the morning, so he'd know each mistake she made and how many times she repeated them. "I've got to attack this thing from a completely different angle tomorrow," she thought. "I've got to demonstrate an ability to change my tactics when my first attempts fail. Otherwise, I'll just come across as stubborn and unimaginative, and that's a very poor combination for a future Starfleet officer." Kathryn spent 3 hours going over the problem, and she didn't get to bed until 2 o'clock the next morning. For the 27th time, Epsilon 1 exploded. Kathryn pounded her fist down hard on her console. "Computer, again!" She didn't have to supply a precise explanation of what she wanted anymore. The holosuite computer had repeated her command so many times now that it automatically returned her to the same scenario at the same place. Each readout shimmered back to its starting point. Then Epsilon 1 popped back into existence on the view screen. Kathryn unclenched her fist, made a quick note on a datapad, then opened her mouth to say, "Begin!" But nothing came out. No words, no sound, not even a squeak. Kathryn stood there with her mouth hanging open, and nothing happened. All around her, instrumentation, gauges, readouts, and view screens stood frozen in hollow time, waiting for the command to imitate reality. But Kathryn Janeway couldn't give the command. Slowly, she sank into a chair, dazed. Her fingers grew numb, and her datapad clattered to the floor. A full week had passed since Mallet had assigned Kathryn and Paul the Greasy test. And over that week, Kathryn had pondered the puzzle every spare moment she had. Paul tried her best to work with her each evening in the holosuite, but Kathryn didn't want the diasamon's help. "If the dorm drill had been real, I could have destroyed an entire starship full of people," she kept telling Paul. "I don't deserve any help with this. I've got to do it myself." Paul tried to remind her that the test had been assigned to both of them, but Kathryn was so obsessed now that she wouldn't listen. At one point, Kathryn had concluded that the test must be unsolvable, and she'd reported that to Mallet. He'd only looked at her with one side of his mouth quirked up. "No, Cadet Janeway, there is a solution," he had assured her. "You just have to find it." "With all due respect, sir, it's not there," Kathryn had boldly insisted. With equal insistence, Mallet had repeated, "There is a solution, Cadet. That's all I'm going to say." After that, Kathryn started to come to the holosuite alone. She was going to find the solution if it killed her. When she finally triumphed, she would share the solution with Paul, and they would both be rid of this maddening burden. Yet tonight was her third solo trip, and things seemed as hopeless as ever. Greasy was just one brick wall Kathryn couldn't seem to climb. Heaving a sigh born of depression as much as fatigue, Kathryn pulled herself to her feet. "Computer, arch," she commanded. As if by magic, the holosuite's arched exit appeared. Slipping a hand into her pocket, Kathryn pulled out a program chip and placed it into a secondary input slot of the Arch's control panel. "Computer, superimpose additional program Kathryn 1 with modifications." Nothing happened. "Computer, I said run additional program." "I'm over here," came a familiar voice. Kathryn turned to find Amelia Earhart, not 2 feet tall, standing in the far corner. "Is this some kind of joke, kid?" Amelia asked, hands on hips, eyes narrow. Kathryn's nerves snapped. She burst into laughter, pointing at Amelia, and collapsed into a chair. Amelia folded her arms and just stood there tapping one foot. I'm sorry, Kathryn gasped, chuckling, but I just didn't expect.
A munchkin? I know, Amelia finished. My program isn't compatible with this greasy simulation. It put a glitch in my code if you'd care to fix it.
Kathryn's chuckles subsided. I don't have time, Amelia, and it doesn't really matter how tall you are. I just need to talk to you.
Well, I need to see something besides your shins,
Amelia retorted. Kathryn picked her hollow friend up and placed her on a console. Better?
It'll do.
Amelia straightened her leather aviator's jacket.
So what's up?
Kathryn spoke almost too cheerfully, with an edge of hysteria in her voice. I'm cracking up, Amelia. I don't know what's happening anymore. I mean, no matter how hard I try, I fail. No matter how focused I am, everything's a blur. She threw her hands in the air. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Amelia said nothing. In fact, she turned her back on Kathryn, gazing around the emitter control room with an expression of awe, peering into readout screens as big as she was, and gingerly fingering control pads that were so sensitive they could have responded to her miniature touch if the greasy program had been running. Kathryn frowned. Amelia, pay attention. Amelia calmly turned back around.
I'm listening. You're complaining because you can't solve a little problem by yourself. Well, let me tell you something, kid. Flying solo isn't easy. It never was. I should know. If you think it's hard now, wait until your problems are real. No.
Amelia turned back to fingering a console curiously.
You need a little perspective, I think.
Kathryn's face flushed red with anger. All right, then give it to me.
You can't just give somebody perspective, said Amelia. Come on, Kathryn, step back and take a look at yourself. From what I can see, you put more emphasis on achieving goals than on why you want to achieve those goals. Just tell me something. What are you here for?
I'm trying to solve this stupid test.
No, I mean Starfleet Academy. Why are you here?
Kathryn blinked. I want a career in Starfleet, she answered reasonably.
But why?
As if the simple question were as much of a test as Greasy itself, Kathryn kicked into overdrive, struggling to compose a perfect response. I want a life of adventure, she declared. I want to explore planets nobody's ever seen before, see things nobody's ever seen before. I mean, some of the Starfleet stories that Daddy used to tell me when I was little. Her voice trailed off.
Go on,
Amelia prodded, but Kathryn couldn't speak. Daddy, she thought, wondering. Amelia broke the silence.
Kid, you're not falling apart. You're just trying too hard to do too much. You're only one person, and there are only 24 hours in a day. You can only accomplish so much. That was a fact even in my time. She glanced at the tiny watch on her wrist. And speaking of time, it's almost 5 o'clock. Dinner in the mess hall, if I'm not mistaken.
Kathryn's thoughts were more confused now than ever before.
So go eat a decent meal, and don't eat it alone. Sit with somebody, for goodness sake. Talk to somebody real.
Amelia finished with emphasis.
Give yourself a break, kid, before you break, okay? Promise me.
Kathryn nodded. Okay. Amelia jabbed a finger at the Arch's control panel.
Now turn me off. I hate being small.
Computer, Kathryn said. End program, Kathryn 1. Amelia waved as she faded away. For an instant, Kathryn thought of trying the greasy just one more time, but she'd given her word, even if it was to a hologram. She turned off the test program and went to have dinner with a friend. If I have any left, she thought glumly. Chapter 8. Kathryn finished eating dinner and placed her tray on the recycle shelf. It disappeared in a sparkling spiral of energy, its molecular components ready to be recombined to make a new, clean, replicated place setting later. Kathryn had eaten alone. She'd walked hopefully, if not confidently, into the mess hall for dinner, only to discover that she didn't know a single person there. Rallying her courage, she'd gone to her room to fetch Thrumpole, but they were out. Dunkirk wasn't in his room either. Even Hallie Coogan was out. Though she knew she should have tried to make a new friend, Kathryn had decided to eat alone. Again. Thanks for the advice, Amelia, she thought sourly as she returned to her room afterwards.
Now I feel worse than I did before.
Kathryn sat down at her study desk, anxious to lose herself in homework, when she noticed the COM pad on her desk blinking. It was a message from CGC Mallet. "Report immediately to my office."
He must have checked my performance on the greasy test. I doubt he's pleased.
Steeling herself for a reprimand, Kathryn headed for his office. Once there, she activated the door chime, noticing Mallet's countdown clock as she did so. The number read 8 now.
3 more cadets have washed out since I started the greasy test, she thought. Will I make it 9?
"Come," said a stern voice from inside the office. The door opened to reveal CGC Mallet seated behind his desk. "Ah, Cadet Janeway. Come in, please." The more polite and friendly Mallet was, the worse the news he had to give. That was how it seemed to work, anyway. Kathryn walked in, more nervous than before, and sat in one of the contoured chairs. Mallet cleared his throat as if preparing himself for something unpleasant. "I'm disappointed in you, Cadet," he said. Kathryn gulped.
Sir?
"I'd been given to understand that you're a bright, energetic, enthusiastic, and honest individual." Kathryn wanted to say, "I am," but obviously Mallet already thought differently. He explained. "I accessed your greasy performance records from the Holosuite Center this afternoon and noticed that a second program had been superimposed on it for approximately 5 minutes. Exactly what was this program?"
Amelia. He found a trace of Amelia.
Kathryn wasn't simply startled or even embarrassed. She slipped into full-scale panic.
If he finds out about her, I'll be the laughingstock of the Academy.
It took all of Kathryn's willpower to keep her voice steady.
I can explain, sir.
"Please do."
It was
Kathryn struggled as her voice threatened to quit on her.
a personal program, sir.
"Personal in what way?"
It was something I brought from home.
Kathryn cringed as Mallet's eyes grew dark. "Let's cut to the chase, Cadet Janeway. Were you using a program simulation aid?"
Sir!
The word leaped from Kathryn's mouth like a shot from an old-style pistol. So this was Mallet's concern. He suspected her of cheating.
I am not a cheater, sir,
she assured him. "Then what was that program?" Cornered, Kathryn reluctantly explained how she'd modified a counseling program years ago, about how Amelia had helped her over the years, and how she'd brought Amelia with her to Starfleet Academy. Mallet listened without showing any reaction, but Kathryn herself felt like a fool by the time her story was finished. Mallet sighed, and his mask of non-reaction slipped. It revealed disappointment, not just a little, but a lot, as if he felt personally betrayed. The look reminded Kathryn of her father when he was disappointed in her. For Kathryn, nothing was worse than disappointing her father. "The Academy can't have its officers in training running to their imaginary friends when things get tough," Mallet said after a moment. "You will bring me the Amelia program chip immediately, and I will return it to you after you have graduated, if you graduate. Till that time, I suggest that if you feel a need for counseling, you make an appointment with an Academy professional. Do I make myself clear?" Kathryn wanted to run away, to hide, to do anything but feel the hot wave of embarrassment that coursed through her body. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "That will be all, Cadet. Dismissed." Moving as quickly as she could without actually running, Kathryn left the room. Two days later, Kathryn felt worse than ever. Without Amelia to turn to, she felt isolated from everyone, alone even in a room full of people. Like a robot, she could carry on a conversation, but throughout such moments she felt as if she were trapped in a bubble, trying to break through some invisible nightmarish boundary that kept her from really connecting with anyone around her. Thanks to her own prime directive, Kathryn had pushed her peers so far away she couldn't reach them anymore. When she wasn't in class, she spent her time in the greasy simulation. If nothing else, She had to convince Mallet she wasn't a quitter. But whatever the CGC thought of her efforts, those efforts were making Kathryn's relationship with Thrumpole nearly intolerable. That afternoon, as she approached her room, she heard them talking inside. "Pole, this has gone far enough. You must tell Mallet. You two are supposed to be working on the test together, and instead Kathryn is doing it all by herself and failing. It's making you look bad." Kathryn didn't stay long enough to hear Pole's reply. That evening, she avoided her room and escaped to the study lounge to cram for an astronavigation exam. She was so exhausted after several hours of fighting Greasy, however, that she fell asleep within minutes. Vaguely, she heard cadets come and go, keeping their voices low so as not to disturb their studying or sleeping peers. Then one voice broke through to Kathryn's consciousness. "There she is!" Kathryn opened one eye and spotted Thrumpole standing in the doorway of the study lounge, staring right at her. Thrum was frowning while Pole fidgeted nervously. Kathryn's first impulse was to close her eye, remain motionless, and hope they went away. But Thrum started forward, pulling Pole after her. At a loss to know how to handle the situation, Kathryn feigned sleep until the Diacemans were standing in front of her. "Kathryn?" came Thrum's firm voice. Kathryn opened her eyes, pretending that she'd just awakened. "May we sit down?"
Sure."
Kathryn knew what was going to happen and dreaded it.
"You saw it coming," she thought. "Now there's no way out."
Thrumpole sat down.
"We need to talk,"
Thrum began.
"about the Greasy test,"
finished Pole reluctantly.
"and other things as well. The fact is, Kathryn,"
a new voice broke in. "Kathryn, there you are!" Kathryn was never so glad to see Dunkirk Frost as she was at that moment. Why he wanted to even speak to her at this point was a mystery, but at least his appearance was cutting short a conversation that Kathryn didn't want to have. Other cadets in the room stared as he hurried over to her table, but they went back to studying when Dunkirk plunked himself down in a chair and said in a barely audible whisper, "I have news." Clearly Thrum didn't appreciate this interruption, but Pole smiled at the young man.
"What is it?"
Dunkirk leaned close. "I found out Sleepless Coogan's secret. You know, why he's always perfectly dressed for a surprise drill?" He leaned in even closer and whispered even more softly, so softly that Kathryn had to strain to hear. "He sleeps in his uniform. Not only that, but he sleeps above his bed covers. If there's a drill, he just leaps up, combs his hair, and goes. If there's an inspection, all he has to do is straighten his covers and he's set." Thrum was interested now. She exchanged a glance with Pole.
"So that's how he does it. How did you find out?"
"That's between me and modern technology," said Dunkirk with a sly wink. "Let's just say I've been keeping an eye on Mr. Perfect for some time."
"Does Coogan know?"
Thrum asked.
"The question is, does Mallet know?"
said Paul. "No and no," answered Dunkirk. "I think." He turned to Kathryn. "Pretty good, eh, Kathryn? Now we can do the same thing. No more drills with wrinkled uniforms and magneto hair. Don't thank me too much, though. I embarrass easily." He grinned at her expectantly. All Kathryn could do was yawn. She was so tired she could hardly sit up straight.
"Thanks, Frost,"
she slurred.
"Really."
She shook her head, feeling dizzy.
"I'm sorry, you guys, but I have to rest a minute."
Next thing she knew, her head was cradled in her arms, which were folded on the tabletop. Tingles of sleep threatened to carry her away. Dunkirk's smile faded. With her eyes closed, Kathryn couldn't actually see it happen, but somehow she felt it.
"Kathryn, Frost just gave you a wonderful gift," she realized. "And you took it, with nothing more than a slurry, monotone thank you."
Through a haze of sleepiness, her brain finally registered just how impolite, how insensitive she'd become. Kathryn raised her head and opened her mouth to speak, intending to apologize to Dunkirk, but he was already walking away. Before she could call him back, Pole popped up from her chair and trotted after him. Kathryn watched as the normally hesitant diaceman boldly took Dunkirk's arm and pulled him to one side. The two of them started whispering to each other. Maybe it was the study lounge's acoustics. Maybe it was the fact that the cadets in the lounge were all studying quietly. Or maybe it was just a nasty quirk of fate. Whatever the reason, Kathryn could hear what Pole and Dunkirk were saying, though just barely. She knew Thrum could hear them too. "Don't feel bad," Pole said. "I'm sure she likes you. Squawk!" "Yeah, right," Dunkirk replied solemnly. "Pole, I feel like a total idiot. I've tried to be nice to her, but Kathryn's so wrapped up in school, she's not even in our universe anymore. I'm wasting my time." Dunkirk's words hit Kathryn like a slap in the face. "Dunkirk likes me?" she blurted. "You didn't know?" asked Thrum, a distinct tinge of sarcasm to her tone. "Well, no, I mean..." Kathryn's head spun. It must have been obvious to everyone else in the universe but her how Dunkirk kept asking her out to holopics and concerts, and how he always acted so concerned about the events in her life. He really cared. And all she'd done was repeatedly brush him aside. As if that weren't bad enough, Pole was actually defending Kathryn. After the way Kathryn had treated her, Pole was still trying to help. Even Thrum, angry as she was with Kathryn, had the grace not to gloat. Quite the contrary. The diaceman sat gazing at her with an expression of pity more than anything else. Kathryn felt worse than she'd ever felt in her life. "You've made a botch of things, Kathryn. Somehow you've got to straighten everything out, and you've got to do it right now." That's when the klaxon went off.